Hey, what is going on, class? Welcome to a little review video. This is just going to be talking about parallel and perpendicular lines. This is something that's just useful to know. It's good for you to have a general idea of it. It's kind of like writing a check. Many of you, I assume, have never written a check. And I'll be honest, the only time I write a check is when I'm paying my rent. But it's really good to know how to do. If you don't know how to do it, feel free, we can talk about it sometime. But same thing with parallel and perpendicular lines. You don't need it often, but those few times when you do, it's going to make or break a question. And it makes it a lot easier if you just, in the back of your mind, are like, oh yeah, this thing. So let's first talk about parallel lines. So two lines are parallel. Let me switch that. A little out of practice with writing math definitions. Two lines are parallel. We would say this is if with two F's. This means if and only if, which is a mathematical way of saying that if you know one of these things, if you know two lines are parallel, you can say the next part, or if you know the next part, you can say they're parallel. So two lines are parallel if and only if they never intersect, which we can also say means they are a constant distance away at any point. They are a constant distance apart at any point along them. So parallel, we can also say parallel. We have this symbol here for parallel. So let's look at some equations that are parallel. Y equals 5/3 x plus 1, and y equals 5/3 x minus 3. Really, there are an infinite number of lines here that are parallel, and it's all coming down to this, that slope. So parallel lines have the same slope. So you could literally write anything you want in that final number piece, that constant we're adding on, the b value. Any number, it would be parallel to this. So long as it's not the same b value, you're good. So that's parallel lines. Some more examples of parallel lines. If you have y equals any number, say let's -7, and y equals +8, those are parallel. Any y equals a number and another y equals a number are parallel because, in this case, that same slope is 5/3 for that example. This one, your slope is just 0. You basically took that mx plus b and you just made that thing a 0, so you don't write it. So this is just the y-intercept, but the slope is 0. One more example is x equals 1 and x equals 3. Once again, this one is parallel, but it's a little different because this one is parallel with a slope that is undefined. These two here are very important to remember, that if something is undefined, its slope, then that means that it's x equals a number and x equals a number. If the slope is 0, it's y equals a number. So that's something to keep in mind. Two lines are what we call perpendicular, this symbol here, when their slopes are opposite reciprocals. So slopes are opposite or negative reciprocals. Reciprocals. That's a tough word to spell. But basically, what this means, slopes multiply to -1. So let's look at one. Y equals -3/2 x plus 1. So then its perpendicular line needs to be, so we have -3/2 times something equals -1. Well, to get that something, I'm going to take and divide by the opposite, or multiply by the opposite, divide by this, which means what I want is a positive 2/3 x plus anything. It doesn't matter. You can add whatever you want here. Like I just like +2. These things would be perpendicular because -3/2 times 2/3 equals -1. So that's one example, y equals mx plus b form. Another example is if you get y equals 6, y equals any number, the perpendicular line to that is x equals a number, say -3. And the reason for that is when we're thinking about the opposite reciprocal. So this is the one example where multiplies to -1 does not work, because it is relying on you multiplying things that break math, that are not definitionally sound. So we know that the slope for this one is m equals 0. Or as a fraction, we could say this is 0 divided by, say, 3. You could pick any number you want, but I'm going to divide 0 by 3. If I divide anything by 0 by anything, it's still 0. But let's think about what's the opposite reciprocal. Well, that would be -3 divided by 0. But, zoom in, but we can't divide by 0. And I'll put a little exclamation point there. Although that is 0 factorial then, but we'll get to that someday. But we can't divide by 0. So we call that thing undefined. Because mathematically speaking, we cannot define dividing by 0 without breaking the rest of math. That if we say you can divide by 0, that means you can't do any of the other things that you've ever learned in math. In order to do those things, we have to assume that you can not divide by 0. Otherwise, it just breaks everything. Things fall apart. There's chaos. People die. It's not fun. So we're just going to leave that as a theoretical thing that people talk about doing on occasion. And then we say no. And we see that this thing here has an undefined slope. So that's just a brief, quick, less than 1 page explanation of parallel and perpendicular lines. If you need any help on these, please be sure to hop into the classroom and we can talk about these quickly. But I hope you're studying for your test and I hope it's going well. Let me know if you need help and have a great rest of your day.